My first book was about Winston Churchill, which I started researching 30 years ago. Since then I've written 5 books with Churchill in the title or the subtitle. I rather feel, like Churchill when he became Prime Minister, that all my past life has been but a preparation for this hour and for this trial. It's now, I think, that's the right time. I've done a huge biography of Napoleon, and who can you follow Napoleon with except for Winston Churchill? Over the last 40 years, I've been collecting bits of Churchill memorabilia. Not just Churchill, but historical memorabilia. Come and have a look. Well, this is my study where I write my books, and that is a pennant from Winston Churchill's car when he was Lord Warden of the Cinque Ports. This is an invitation to the Iron Curtain speech where he warned against the dangers of Soviet communism in 1946. This is a leaflet that was handed out to everybody in southern England about what to do when the Germans landed. It has wonderful pieces of advice like, do not believe rumours and do not spread them. Fake news obviously existed before Mr. Trump. Then we can look here at my pride, really, of my collection, which is Winston Churchill's bow tie, which I bought at auction recently. It's slightly frayed and discoloured, and so he wore it a lot. This is Churchill's hairbrush, which he presumably didn't use that much, and that's a page from his biography of his great ancestor, the Duke of Marlborough, and a couple of letters and a speech of his and some signatures of his. And then over here on this wall is a drawing that Churchill drew of a pig with his eyes shut in 1959. I've also, of course, got a picture of him on my desk. It doesn't mean this extraordinary, ridiculous obsession that I have with what my wife calls bric-a-brac, that I'm not objective about Winston Churchill. I am. I see his faults. But overall, I think he was a very great man, and I think the readers will too. I think this book's going to be different from other biographies of Churchill because really since 2001, which is when the last big biography came out by Roy Jenkins, there have been 41 major sets of papers deposited at the Churchill Archives in Cambridge. And Her Majesty the Queen has graciously permitted me to be the first Churchill biographer to use her father's diaries in Windsor Castle. And so there is an enormous amount that's new that one can say about Churchill, which seems extraordinary because, of course, there are 1,009 biographies of Churchill. But nonetheless, there will be something on pretty much every page of this book that is of primary research that won't have been read in any other book on him. This is a map of all of the places that Churchill visited during the Second World War outside Britain. So you can, and also how he got there by ship or plane. You can see all the trips backwards and forwards across the Atlantic, the trips to Cairo, to Tehran, to Moscow. It's a fascinating single artefact which underlines the fact that this 70-year-old man travelled 120,000 miles during the war in order to undertake the meetings he needed to with Roosevelt and Stalin and others. The relationship between King George VI and Churchill was a fascinating one. It went through a series of incredibly interesting, rather delicate, subtle changes. Right at the beginning, the king didn't much like Churchill. Churchill had supported King Edward VIII, his brother, during the abdication crisis. He didn't trust him, in common with much of the rest of the establishment, and he thought that he was a bit of a has-been. But as Churchill first became First Lord of the Admiralty and then went on to become Prime Minister during the Second World War, the king came to like him, admire him, trust him, and in the end they became as close as it's possible to have as actual friends between a monarch, of course, and a Prime Minister. It's a wonderful story, really. The bibliography of Churchill is, of course, absolutely vast, notoriously vast. There are 1,009 biographies of him. Those are just letters that he wrote, coming up to there, and they're not even finished. That's going to go to the end of the shelf. He wrote those books, most of those books. Those are books written about him. So are those over there, and all of those ones there. And there are at least 700 other ones in libraries that I simply can't fit in here. Churchill made endless mistakes. He himself said, "I should have made nothing if I had not made mistakes." And this book is in no way a hagiography. It does go into his mistakes at the Gallipoli campaign being a classic example, of course. 1925, decision to join the gold standard, the abdication crisis. He made mistake after mistake. But he learnt from each of them. And more importantly, he grew as a person, really, via his mistakes, and none of them were so serious as to not be able to be completely blotted out by the things he got right, which of course were the stand against appeasement and then his great wartime premiership. So his mistakes need to be put in their proper historical context. They mustn't be ignored, they mustn't be whitewashed, but they have to be looked at in the round of an extraordinary and remarkable man. This is a photograph by Cecil Beaton of Winston Churchill's bedroom in the number 10 annex above what's now the Churchill War Rooms. He slept in that bed pretty much every night of the Blitz, and as you can see, he had a painting of his mother, Jenny Jerome, above his bed. I found the process of writing this book much more exhausting than I thought I was going to. He wrote 7.1 million words and he spoke 5.2 million. And it has therefore been completely knackering, frankly. In recent years, especially on the internet, Winston Churchill has been attacked for all sorts of things like sinking the Lusitania or gassing tribes in Iraq, or the Bengal famine of 1943 and 1944. Each time you've got to look very carefully into the sources, you've got to check the evidence, and you've got to work out whether or not any of these are genuine criticisms of him. In terms of the Lusitania, the whole thing's complete tripe. In terms of the Iraqi gassing, what he actually said, when you read the original letter in the Churchill archives, is that he wanted to use tear gas, not mustard gas. And with the Bengal famine, it was a terrible tragedy. A cyclone hit Bengal and destroyed the rice crop, and you couldn't get any rice from Burma because the Japanese had captured Burma, and their submarines were all over the Bay of Bengal. When you actually look into many of the new strain of really very aggressive criticism against Churchill, it just simply doesn't stack up. And so my book is going to be able to be used by people who want to know more about this and have heard these criticisms, but actually want to also hear the other side of the story. I've been surprised by so many things in the researching of this book, which is a bit weird considering that it is my 30th year of writing about this man. Really, the thing I found most surprising was how emotional he was. Incredibly passionate man. Not in the sexual sense. All the stuff about him having a mistress that we heard this year is complete and utter bilge. However, he was incredibly passionate in other things, especially, of course, to do with his political career. He was in tears for a great deal of the time. I have diagnosed 50 times that Winston Churchill burst into tears during the Second World War. Can you imagine a war today where the Prime Minister in public starts crying? This was because he was a romantic figure, he was a Regency figure, much more than a sort of late Victorian figure into which he actually was born. So it was fascinating for me to see the sheer emotion and passion that this man put into everything he did.